Hello, welcome to Business Success Talk. I'm Daniel Ortiz, and today my guest is the original founder of the iconic restaurant Rancho de Chimayo. So Arturo Jaramillo, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me here.
So I'm excited to have you on this show because you are the founder of an iconic New Mexico restaurant, the Rancho de Chimayo. I think anybody who lives in northern New Mexico, north of Bernalillo County for sure, has either heard or been to the Rancho de Chimayo.
Aren't I lucky, huh?
Well, we're lucky. We're lucky to have you. So, before we get into the story of the restaurant, Arturo, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as an entrepreneur.
I was raised by my grandparents in Chimayo and lived with them until they passed away. I ended up in a service during the Korean War.
What branch of the service were you?
Navy.
Navy.
Spent a lot of time in Spain and throughout the Mediterranean.
While you were on tour
Well, I was
service?
in the Navy, yeah.
Okay.
I was on a carrier named the USS Midway, and the Midway would go from port to port, and because I spoke Spanish, I served as an interpreter for the Navy for almost 2 years.
Oh, is that right? You were how old at that time?
18, 19, 20.
So, going from a little town of Chimayo, New Mexico, to the ports of Spain and the Mediterranean, that must have been very exciting.
It wasn't not only exciting, but it was enlightening because when I got to Barcelona, I ordered enchiladas and they didn't know what I was talking about.
Okay, that's a perfect segue. We'll go back to that in a minute. Well, of course, you can't get a decent enchilada outside of northern New Mexico anyway, right? I mean,
that
even
is
in the
so true.
States. I mean, all of us have traveled, and it's just not the same.
Never the same.
Okay, so you're in Chimayo, New Mexico. What was the population at that time when you grew up?
Oh my God!
I mean,
at
it's
the
still
time,
small.
I grew up there, and there were no cars. We were on wagons and horses, no bicycles. This was in the 30s.
1930s.
A population had to be.
And they're probably all cousins, right?
Yeah, all of them, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
And you didn't dare get in trouble because everybody would tell on you.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I was well behaved at that time.
Okay, so what on earth prompted you to start a restaurant in Chimayo, New Mexico?
I had been gone.
Was this after the service?
Yes.
Okay.
I had been gone into the service for 4 years and then lived in Connecticut for 10 years. I inherited part of the property and I bought the other heirs out and decided to move back to New Mexico. I really wanted to go back to my roots. We had plenty of land, so there was a farm there and there was an orchard there. And I really wanted to live there and have a comfortable life. After a year of farming, I realized that farmers weren't making much money. They couldn't
Well,
be.
especially in the 30s or probably 40s by that time, right?
No, this was in the 50s.
Okay.
Yeah, this was in the 50s, in the 60s, excuse me. This is the late 50s, early 60s. And I decided at that time that in order to live there, to be able to provide for my family and provide economic development for the people in Chimayo, a restaurant would be successful. In Spain, I traveled throughout parts of Spain and the Mediterranean and the East Coast when I lived there for 10 years, and there were always restaurants out of the way and bed and breakfasts out of the way. And my thought was, if it works there, why wouldn't it work here? I can use the produce that I raise and buy from the farmers around me to serve the food and create the dishes that we're familiar with.
Okay, so let me ask you a business question. Who's going to eat there? I mean, this is in Chimayo in the 50s, right? I don't know if the highways were developed. What was your thinking from a business standpoint?
Well, this was in the late 50s and early 60s, and what you're asking me is exactly what bankers asked me when I try to get financing. Who's going to eat there?
Right.
Well, my hope was that the place would be impressive enough and good enough for people that come from Santa Fe, Los Alamos, Taos, Albuquerque.
So you had the original build it and they will come
Yes.
theory.
Yeah, and it was almost impossible to get financing. I had a business plan.
What was the feedback from the people when you said, I'm going to start a restaurant? What was the
You're
reaction?
crazy.
You're crazy? Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Who's going to drive the Chimayo, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not that Chimayo was not famous anyway with the church and the weavers,
Right.
but a restaurant in Chimayo is not going to work. But my thought was, if you put linen, napkin, paper, cloth napkins, dress your staff.
So this is like an upscale
And
restaurant.
yes, very
Okay.
much so.
Uh-huh.
And we started with 3 rooms and a small kitchen. And now we can serve up to 130.
So I think we have some photos of the new. I think there was a fire there a couple of years back. So here's tell us about this photo here.
That's a very recent picture. We were just there with my wife and my friend Linda and our 2 puppies.
So you started this with 3 rooms, and fast forward to today, how many square feet do you have out there now?
Oh, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we can serve up to 230.
Is that right?
We have 230 seats.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm still fascinated about this idea that you had, and everybody's telling you no. And I think one of the ways that you can tell if you're an entrepreneur, you're not a true entrepreneur if people don't tell you you're crazy. That's just my theory. Because we're crazy like a fox, but you had some kind of intuition, inkling that this is going to work, right?
Well, yeah, a desire to live there, and I had to prove to myself that there was something I could do there to provide economic development for the people around the village. You know, there was no employment. Although Los Alamos was here, and
Right.
so is Santa Fe,
Yeah.
but that requires a commute. My thought is I could hire and train people from within the village, and we're all related.
Right.
You know,
And all the
that
ingredients
worked.
come from that area. I mean, that Chimayo chili is like famous. It's the best in the
Chimayo
world.
chili, all the vegetables came from there, all the fruit came from there. We developed what we call the Chimayo cocktail at one time
Is that right?
to promote New Mexico apples.
Okay.
We started a co-op, apple co-op in Chimayo to sell apples because everybody could grow them, but the selling was a problem.
Right.
And I wanted to overcome that.
Okay, very good. So how did you end up getting the financing for the restaurant? You said you went and approached banks, and there's a story about the SBA, Small Business Administration.
Even before the SBA, I went to every bank in Albuquerque, every bank in Santa Fe, every bank in Espanola, and every bank in Taos, and nobody would listen to me.
Right. Well, restaurants in general are notoriously risky.
Very much so.
I mean,
very
and so
much so.
I can only imagine starting one in Chimayo.
Even in this day and age, it's risky,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So what happened is I got involved in agriculture, and in one of the boards that I served, I had made my presentation, and the man that I impressed was a fellow by the name of Phil Lovato, who ended up as a mayor of Taos.
Now, this is he's at a bank or the SBA where?
No, that was one of our agricultural committees that I belonged to.
Okay.
But he was a good friend of a man from Chicago by the name of Steve Mitchell. Steve Mitchell was a banker in Chicago and was a skier, and he bought some property in Taos. And when Phil Lovato was playing golf with him, he says, there's a young man, I was 32 at the time, has got some great ideas, but nobody listens to him. He needs money to start his business. Convince Steve to finance me. Phil called me and he said, I want you to go down to Northern Savings and talk to them. And I said, no way. I said, they've already embarrassed me by saying no 3 times. I walked in, and waiting for me was a piece of paper for me to sign where I was loaned $25,000 with no collateral.
Wow.
And that started me.
Yeah. Well, even today that's a lot of money, but back then that was
that was in the early 60s. That was 60, 61.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a miracle for me, and that made the difference. The SBA story we're talking about is I was not totally successful for the first year and couldn't meet my payroll, so I decided to go to SBA for a loan. This was in Albuquerque.
How did you hold that thought? How did you market the restaurant? I mean, obviously you want people from Santa Fe, Los Alamos to come up. How did you do any advertising, marketing? What kind of?
I did very little advertising at that time because I got a lot of good stories. My thought was not only to create a restaurant, but to create a village, to preserve what Chimayo was like in the 20s and 30s. And in doing that, the Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the Rio Grande paper, Espanola paper, wrote stories on it. The Albuquerque papers wrote stories about what this young man wanted to do in Chimayo. So when the restaurant opened, I had a lot of free publicity.
Wow.
Then what happened, once that started, and people started coming there. One man, everybody asked me about, well, how did you do it, as you're asking me now, and he asked me all kinds of questions and asked if he could see the kitchen, and went into the kitchen, and come to find out he was a food editor that wrote for Associated Press.
Wow.
And I got a lot of free publicity on that, and that really made the difference. That kept bringing people in. The other thing is Los Alamos. When I left New Mexico during the beginning of the Korean War, Los Alamos was a secret city. By the time I got back, I never realized that they would be so willing to leave the hill to come down for good New Mexico food, and that made a world of difference for me. Los Alamos, Santa Fe, and Taos.
Even to this day, there's not a whole lot of places to eat in Los Alamos, is there?
I'm not going to touch that.
But because they do come into Santa Fe and the surrounding area, and just to get out of there, I mean, what a great. One of the things that I'm hearing is that, as an entrepreneur, we make our own luck. A lot of times, you made your own luck, essentially, with the press. Free press and the Associated Press, and press begets press. So once you get known in one periodical, then other people come on board, and that's just an amazing.
They read about it and they want to see what's going on out there,
right?
And then you drive for an hour.
Just the curiosity,
yeah,
alone.
Yeah, and it worked out well for me.
So you had 3 rooms. Did you ever have like overcrowding problem initially?
Not initially. Initially, it was pretty tough. But it worked out so that we had to add the patio to the back, the terraces at the back, and added tables to make it 230 seats, and added a big bar. The original bar was where the storeroom was, where we used to make ristras and work with fruit when we packed it. When we had it bushels and to send out to sell.
Mm-hmm. So you owned that restaurant for some time, and then what's the chronology going forward? Are you still involved with it?
The family, my wife and I divorced, and I left the restaurant to my daughter and my wife. And my former wife owns it now and runs it. My daughter has some involvement in it, but from a distance. She now lives in San Antonio.
Okay. So you ran that for how many years?
From 1965 to 1987.
Okay, so during that time, rumor has it that there was some pretty interesting characters, famous people who led the restaurant. Do you have any stories you want to share?
Oh my gosh, yeah. We've had everyone from, we've had every governor of the state of New Mexico, from King on. We've had every movie actor you could even think of. The one I became friendly with was Robert Redford and Robert Mitchum. They would spend a lot of time there.
Tell us a story about your involvement with Robert Redford. I heard you used to go cruising or something.
Robert Redford was there to film the Milagro Beanfield War.
Uh-huh.
He tried to film it in Chimayo. That didn't work for many reasons, which I won't discuss, but he did it in Truchas, but we became acquainted at that time.
And I want our audience to know that the Milagro Beanfield War is a period film that was set in northern New Mexico, so in your backyard.
Right.
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 And because they spent so much time there, and he would come back periodically even after the film was done, we got to know him quite well. Robert Mitchum the same way. His son filmed a movie in Chimayo a few years later, and Robert Mitchum would come up and visit quite frequently.
All right.
Jimmy Stewart has been there, Elizabeth Taylor, Anthony Quinn.
No. So I want you to hold that thought. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, but I want you to hold that thought, and I want you to tell us a story of one of these movie stars that you'd like to share, that you can share with our audience. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Business Success Talk. I'm Daniel Ortiz, and today my guest is Arturo Jaramillo, the original founder of the iconic restaurant Rancho de Chimayo. So Arturo, you were telling us just a bit about the history of the restaurant and some of the famous celebrities that have been there throughout the years. Do you have any particular stories?
Well, one of my favorite ones, I guess, is Burl Ives.
Burl Ives. He used to live near here.
Galisteo.
In Galisteo. He did, I think, a song about Galisteo, did he?
He did.
Yeah, north of Albuquerque,
and he would come
south
up
of
to Chimayo and hold my daughter, who was very young at that time, maybe 5 or 6, hold her in his lap and sing to her.
Is that right? And he's a big man, isn't he?
Oh, and he would spend the evening there, and he would sing to her, and we would have dinner and enjoy it. He came to me. We built a church in Chimayo because the santuario was getting overcrowded in the other end of town, and he asked me if he could donate the crucifix for the new church. Mm-hmm. And of course, I checked with the priest, and they all agreed that they'd like to see what the crucifix was like. So if you go to Chimayo and go to the new church, the crucifix up at the head of the altar was donated by Burl Ives.
Is that right?
It was very nice to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
He lived in Galisteo for a long time.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
spent a lot of time there.
And again, he had a song about. He wrote a song about it. I remember now. It's coming to my mind.
Jimmy Stewart would come in when we were having meetings and sit there and visit with us. I got very involved in farming and agriculture. Became an advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture. At that time, I would go to Washington. So we had meetings board meetings here at the restaurant.
Is that right?
And Jimmy Stewart joined us a couple of times.
Yeah. Now, was he filming here? Was he living here? What was?
I don't know. He wasn't filming to my knowledge, but he was. A lot of people came to Santa Fe.
Right.
And from Santa Fe, they went to Chimayo, thank God.
Yeah, yeah. Right. It was kind of like an in hangout for celebrities, wasn't it, for a while?
Yes, it was, quite often.
Yeah. And how did the locals feel about celebrities? And like in Santa Fe, it's not unusual to see celebrity here and there, and people kind of just leave them alone. How was the locals react to big? These are big celebrities for their time.
Well, they were, and they are. And let me tell you that the fact that the locals, I hired all local people, right? Mm-hmm. All the workers came from Chimayo, Rio Chiquito, Cordova, Cundio, Truchas, Ojosarco. So they're all part of the family. They were all happy to see that and excited about seeing people that they heard about. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Were they starstruck, or were they kind of?
Yeah, it had
hard not to be.
It had to make a difference. It had to make a difference.
Sure.
It made a difference for me. You try not to make too much of it because they want to go and enjoy privacy. They don't want to necessarily have everybody standing around asking for autographs or.
Right.
Right. So we try to hold it down, and we did to a degree.
All right. Now there was a film, I understand, that was made in Chimayo, and I think your parents or your parents were involved with that. Tell us about that. I think we have a photo. Here we go. Tell us about this.
That was much pre the restaurant. The grandparents were still living there, and I was probably at that time about 13 years old. It was at the beginning of World War II. And the Germans were trying to make inroads into South America, Central America, and Mexico. And the State Department decided to film a movie, a documentary, to send to those countries to show them that there were people in North America and the United States that were Spanish-speaking. And they picked grandfather and grandmother to
these are your grandfather and grandmother. They were in the documentary?
They were in the documentary, and supposedly, the story was their son went into the Air Force to fight for his country. It went all over the Americas.
What was the name of that documentary?
When they filmed it, it was Somewhere USA,
okay,
but in Spanish. Uh-huh. And then MGM bought the rights and renamed it Sons of the Conquistadores.
Was that right?
And they got some kind of award for it. MGM did. We used to go to the theater in Santa Fe and watch the short documentary before the big movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Very interesting because they dressed them just as they lived. They didn't change them. They didn't change anything about them. They didn't have a speaking role. But if we have copies of that film, so thank God we can enjoy their life as they lived it and as I grew up with.
Right. Now those photos were in color, but was a documentary in color or black and white? Because that was some years ago, World War II. I don't know how many films were in color.
I think it was in black and white, and I think it was made in color later on.
Oh, they added color.
They added color later on.
Right. Yeah, because it seemed like a modern photos, but for that period. All right. So what was that like? Were you involved in that documentary?
No, not at all.
No?
It was just of the family. The only ones that were in the film were Grandpa and Grandma.
Okay. So let's segue a little bit into your personal journey. So you started the restaurant. You went off the young man to war.
The Korean War started, and I enlisted in the Navy. Ended up in Spain and the Mediterranean for probably most of my career after my training. When I came out, I'd married a girl from Connecticut, so I chose to stay in Connecticut my first few years out of the service. After when I inherited the property in Chimayo, I decided to come back home, which I always wanted to do, and that's when I decided to do something that I could live with or make a living for our family right in Chimayo and provide employment for people around us and have a place for the farmers to sell their goods. Mm-hmm. They would all bring their chili to me, their apples, their vegetables. Obviously at a good price, and for them they made money, and they didn't have to travel to Santa Fe. They didn't have to travel to Los Alamos or Albuquerque to sell their goods.
Right. So let me ask you a question that I think anybody that's from New Mexico, especially northern New Mexico, has experienced when they move away. What did you do for chili?
Say that again?
What did you do for chili when you lived in Connecticut? Because I lived away. I moved away for a while, and I was just starving for chili. I couldn't find it anywhere. You can't get it anywhere else.
Let me tell you, I lived not too far from New York City, and we would spend time in Connecticut, but also New York City. And do you think the only kind of chili I could find was a canned Ortega's chili?
Yes.
There was not such a thing.
Right. They don't know what it is.
But now you go back there now, and you've got that's another story, more Mexican restaurants than you have any place else in the world, I think. But one of the things I wanted to make sure of is that the food in northern New Mexico was New Mexican food.
Well, I was just going to say, there is a distinction between Mexican and New Mexican food. And not everybody gets that. If you're from here, obviously you know the distinction. It's a huge distinction. I
live in Mexico now part-time, and their food is totally different. The name is the same.
Right.
But the flavors are different.
Yeah, the ingredients are different.
Totally. I went to Spain and I asked for enchiladas. They had no idea what I was talking about. So when I started the restaurant, I wanted it called the New Mexican Restaurant.
Right.
And thanks to my present wife, who was involved with advertising, Yellow Pages started a New Mexican heading for Yellow Pages.
For food, yeah. Well, and even to this day, local restaurants are make an effort to call it New Mexican food, not Mexican food.
Big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. Yeah.
And you know that, and I know that.
Yeah, of course. And so when people come, tourists come, they want Mexican food, and we always have to ask them, "Do you mean New Mexican food?" Right?
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with Mexican food.
No.
We love it,
right.
but it is different.
Yeah,
it is
totally
very
different. Yeah. And again, just the region, the tortillas, the corn tortillas, the blue corn tortillas, the chili. You can only get here. I mean, it's grown here. It's just like wine, different varietals. There's certain wines that grow well in Bordeaux in France or parts of California. It's regional.
Yeah, and look at the carne seca. Carne seca started in our part of the world.
Is that right?
Now jerky, you can buy it anywhere in the world, yeah.
But of course, we put chili on it now, right? We put red. We put chili on everything, right? I think they even have the chili ice cream. I think
in fact, we had a chili margarita last night.
Oh, is that right?
One of the local restaurants in Albuquerque.
Yeah. It wasn't until I was, literally, it's a true story, it wasn't until I was a freshman in college, going to the cafeteria, that I didn't know that the rest of the world didn't have chili with their eggs. I mean, I literally was asked at the cafeteria, "Where's the chili?" And they would always point me to the salsa, which was just tomatoes and onion. I mean, it wasn't even close. No. So I would get, we call them care packages of chili from home, put them in the refrigerator. Of course, all my northern New Mexico friends would come around and want some, and no way they were going to get any of my chili.
And it's the best. It's the best.
Oh, yeah.
Green chili, both in a sauce, and both green chili as...
and with eggs in the morning. I mean, how can you not have chili with eggs? I mean, it just makes no sense. Ketchup, just, I don't understand.
Well, look how successful the restaurant is, just because of that.
Yeah, Chimayo chili is red, is the best. Well, in New Mexico, we say Hatch green and Chimayo red.
There you go.
You know, that's it doesn't get any better than that. So tell us, what are you doing now? You sold the restaurant years ago?
Well, I didn't sell it. I left it to the family. It's owned by my daughter and my former wife.
Hold that thought. What is this picture here? Look at that.
This is the staff that I started with back in Chimayo.
Oh, that's you in the red.
That's me in the red with my red vest.
You had black hair then.
Yeah, you're right, and a black beard.
So
I started my beard when I was Diego de Vargas.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I told your nephew, Joseph, that when he showed me those pictures, I said, this is a classic, iconic Castilian face. I mean, it's a Castilian look. So this is at the restaurant, they're preparing food, or what are they doing, these ladies?
Yeah, they're preparing food for, actually it was a picture that was taken for the Time magazine, Foods of the Southwest.
Oh, you were featured in Time?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was a picture that was taken for that.
So did you ever think, when you started that restaurant, that you'd end up in Time magazine?
No. No, never. I knew we would be successful, but never did I envision
the extent of it. Yeah.
And with the employment it has provided, I have kids that work there that have become very successful, from doctors to attorneys to teachers. It's amazing what that has done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't just create a restaurant. You created I don't even know what the word is. It's an iconic New Mexico restaurant. I mean,
it is.
You know, people will come to Santa Fe from all over the world, and you know, they will, if they have the time, they will make a trip out there to that restaurant.
Yeah. We're very lucky.
And the drive is beautiful as well. I mean,
oh my God! When you go over that mountain and you see the Green Valley down below, the restaurant property sits where two rivers meet, the Santa Cruz River and the Rio Chiquito. So you can see why it's all so green in that area.
Right, right. So I interrupted you earlier. So what are you doing now? You're living in Mexico, I understand?
I live in Mexico part-time with my lovely wife, and we live right on the beach. I have two puppies, I think you saw in one of the pictures, yeah. And we come here and spend, we can't get away from New Mexico food, right? So we come here and spend summer and early fall here, and then now we're going back to Mexico for the winter.
Is this in Mexico here, this photo here?
That picture was taken in Mexico, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was me on one of the beaches there. What a life, huh?
Well, yeah, good life. Yeah, earlier today when we introduced each other, you said you were the luckiest. I asked you how you want to be introduced, and you said that's the luckiest man.
I am.
In the world. So
lucky that the restaurant ended up as a success, that it provided so much for the people in northern New Mexico at the time where there were no jobs. And my life now, I'm very happy life that I have with my wife and my two puppies.
All right. So are you like a lot of New Mexico expatriates? Do you take like frozen green chili with you to Mexico?
You know,
or do you take the powdered chili?
It's tough. The only way I can't take frozen green chili unless I hide it.
Oh, okay.
And I drive back and forth quite often, or I fly quite often. But you have to hide it if you can get away with it. And you know, Mexicans are getting smart. They know that New Mexico green chili is better than
theirs. There's a flag. These people from New Mexico, they're going to have chili this summer, right? They're smuggling chili into Mexico.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people here, they will freeze it. What's it called? They freeze it.
Fast freeze.
Fast freeze or something, and they'll ship it. They'll put it in a box and UPS it, and I think
that's something new. You know, it happened at one time. Esquire magazine.
Freeze dried, I think it's called.
Featured us as one of the restaurants where you can buy food before Amazon, right? And we started shipping dishes all over the United States.
From the restaurant?
Yeah, but I had to drive to Albuquerque to get it on an airplane, right?
Yeah.
So that we had to end that because it just wasn't affordable to do it that way. Right. But we've been very lucky. We've been featured on every magazine imaginable in the United States. It's been a great success, and it's been a lot of work, but it's paid off.
Right. Well, that's a fascinating story, and again, it's an iconic restaurant, and I like the fact that it's an entrepreneur journey, because you start off with the idea that people think you're crazy, and you just made it work, and it's a phenomenal success. So Arturo, thank you very much for sharing your story with us on Business Success Talk, and I want to thank our audience for joining us on this edition of Business Success Talk, and make sure to visit us online at businesssuccesstalk.com.
Thank you for having me here.